My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 43 years old. I spent 18 years building the backbone of Braverton Analytics until they replaced me with a man who thinks debugging means refreshing the browser. They didn't just try to erase me, they tried to rewrite everything I built. So I let the system decide who deserves to stay. If you've ever been sidelined for doing your job too well, this story is for you. If this kind of story resonates with you, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that matter. Let's begin. Evelyn, do you have a moment? Bring your laptop. That was the end of my 18-year legacy. Rain had been falling for 3 days straight. On that Thursday, April 25th, 2024, Chicago's sky hadn't changed. Gray, tired, and weeping. I should have known something was about to shift. Not because of the drizzle against the glass windows or the weight of the clouds sagging over the skyline, but because silence had suddenly become polite. Too polite. The executive floor of Braverton Analytics always felt sterile. The walls were lined with brushed steel, and the tinted windows overlooked a city that barely blinked. I passed the reception desk, where Clara gave me a small, tight-lipped smile. She didn't meet my eyes. That's when I felt the twist start in my stomach. Richard Price's office smelled like filtered air and artificial calm. He stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, his tailored suit crisp as always. His voice, when he turned to greet me, had the same tone he used when dismissing interns. Warm, but final. "Thanks for coming, Evelyn," he said. "Let's keep this brief." My chair was already pulled out. On the small table to the side, 2 untouched espressos sat cooling. Then came Blake. Late, naturally. His sneakers squeaked faintly on the polished floor as he strolled in, a shiny smartwatch lighting up with notifications he didn't bother silencing. He dropped into the second chair without so much as a glance my way. Richard cleared his throat, smiling the way people smile when they want to sell you something you already own. We're at a point in Braverton's journey where innovation is critical. Blake has just completed his master's in digital innovation at Stanford. Fresh ideas, fresh perspective. He'll be shadowing you for a while. Shadowing. The word clanged in my head like an elevator alarm. I kept my expression neutral, but I knew the company's language well. Shadowing meant observation, transition, replacement. You didn't mentor your successors here. You faded out while they took your seat. I turned slightly toward Blake, who was scrolling through something with a smirk. He didn't look up. "And what exactly?" I asked Richard evenly. "Will Blake be learning from me?" Richard gestured vaguely. "Workflow, project oversight, leadership. Everything you've done so well for so long." "So long. Not anymore, then." I nodded once. Slowly. Blake finally looked up, catching my gaze for half a second. There was no hostility there. Just boredom. Like he had already moved on to the next meeting, the next pitch, the next award that would bear his name. Richard leaned forward, folding his hands. "This isn't about pushing anyone out, Evelyn. It's about modernizing. You've built something incredible here. Now we refine it." And there it was, the polite execution. "I understand," I said. My voice did not tremble. It never had. "Excellent," Richard replied, relief washing over his features like he had just gotten through a difficult client call. "We knew you'd take this with grace." I rose without another word, nodded, and left the room as quietly as I had entered. Back at my desk, the view was the same. Streets wet and glistening, people in coats rushing across intersections like ants avoiding puddles. I placed my laptop on the stand, tapped the keyboard, and stared at the login screen. My reflection blinked back at me. Sharp eyes, tired jawline, and a storm that had nothing to do with weather. I pulled up the terminal, fingers moving on muscle memory. Syswatch override ghost trigger log. Standby. The command sat on the screen like a loaded chamber, silent and still. I hit enter, and the rain kept falling. Blake has full admin access. Make sure he gets the architecture docs. A Slack message. Casual. Like tossing a grenade and walking away. It was Monday morning, April 29th. Chicago was still drenched, like the sky hadn't stopped grieving since Thursday. But the weight in the air had changed. Heavier, almost metallic. I hadn't been consulted on anything since the transition meeting, but the system logs told me more than words ever could. In the open tech wing of Braverton's 6th floor, fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above the polished desks. The space felt colder, louder, lined with bodies hunched over keyboards and coffee cups. Near the center, Blake sat at the largest workstation like a prince receiving his court. A semicircle of interns and junior devs hung on his every word as if he were unveiling the next iPhone. I stayed at the periphery, watching. He was making sweeping gestures, tossing around phrases like cloud-native overhaul and zero-trust architecture, with the swagger of someone who had just Googled them that morning. No one questioned him. I did. My terminal hummed softly as I scrolled through the back-end audit logs. A red flag pulsed at 2:14 a.m. Access to the architecture directory, elevated privileges, modifications to a core processing script. The username was Blake P. Blake didn't work at 2 a.m. He barely worked at 2 p.m. A soft ping broke my focus. A direct message from Tara Lynn. Tara. He modified the handler script last night. Something's off. Tara had been one of mine. Quiet, capable, always watching from the shadows. Her message wasn't alarmist, it was surgical. That's how I knew she was serious. I replied with a single ellipsis and leaned back in my chair. There are things I built into the system years ago. Fail-safes, monitoring ghosts that move silently beneath the surface. I had always considered them protective instincts. Now, they felt like insurance. I tapped into the terminal and activated the first tier. Initiate ghost.watch/tier1- passive trace enabled. The system acknowledged the command. No fanfare, no blinking lights. Just a heartbeat deep within the code, waiting. Across the room, Blake leaned over an intern's desk and barked something about data bloat. I heard him say the word legacy like it was an insult. Then came the hiccup. A small alert chimed. One of the auto-generated reports to a Fortune 100 client had failed. Not crashed. Just delayed. A delay of 13 seconds. Blake stood up, voice loud and dismissive. That's legacy junk. I'm optimizing the pipeline. It'll clear itself up. The room nodded along. Not a single person asked for a rollback. No one even blinked. But I did. 13 seconds meant one of the critical processing nodes had encountered a race condition. That node hadn't failed in 3 years. And now it had. After Blake's 2 a.m. experiment. I returned to my desk. Tara walked by slowly, dropping a folded sticky note onto the corner of my keyboard without breaking stride. On it, he copied handler v3 to handler opt-x and rerouted call stack alignment. That wasn't optimization. That was dangerous tinkering by someone who didn't understand the system's nervous system. My fingers moved with precision. Anomaly detected. User, Blake P. Trigger string initialized. The log accepted it quietly. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. The system was listening. Evelyn, are you still rooted? Miles whispers, eyes focused on the diagnostic warning blinking red like a heartbeat. Friday, May 3rd. The clock on the wall in the server room ticked with an exaggerated slowness, almost as if mocking them. The room smelled of metal and static, a chilled undercurrent of something ancient and humming. Evelyn didn't look away from the console. Miles hovered just behind her, unusually silent. He had barely spoken since they descended into the sub-basement of Braverton HQ, where only a few ever ventured, and fewer still stayed long enough to understand what pulsed through its wires. The access logs had said it plainly. Blake had tried, unsuccessfully, recklessly, to overwrite a core module that served as a bridge between 143 subroutines. A digital artery. Evelyn hadn't needed to look to know he'd failed. The system had stopped him before he knew what he'd triggered. Now the console's screen bloomed with cascading warnings. No alarms rang. There were no klaxons. Just quiet crimson text that flickered in a rhythm almost human. Miles exhaled, tapping the side of his glasses. How long has it been since you patched this segment? Evelyn replied without emotion. 3 years. It never needed one. Until now. She finally turned and their eyes met. Miles Grant had always been the numbers man, the architect behind the architecture. But today, his usually confident expression wavered. Something had shifted in the way he looked at her, like he was finally seeing the outline of a shadow he had chosen to ignore. He cleared his throat. Would you mind taking a closer look? I don't trust anyone else to poke at this without waking up something worse. She nodded once and bent over the terminal. Her fingers glided across the keyboard with the familiarity of a priest touching sacred script. A hidden panel appeared. Ghost Logs wasn't visible unless you knew exactly which keystroke summoned it. She had made sure of that. Inside, she found what she feared. Phase 2 had triggered. No one, no human, had activated it. The system had identified the faulty code segment, quarantined it, and begun replicating safeguards. It was, in a very literal sense, defending itself. The red pulses on the screen now looked less like error and more like decision. Evelyn straightened. It's running autonomously. Miles blinked. Excuse me? She pointed. That's not Blake's code. That's the legacy fallback module. I built it during the security breaches in 2018. It was never part of the official documentation. Lines of code streamed faster now, a rush of logic rebuilding what had been broken. Miles leaned in, puzzled. Then he stopped. One folder stood out among the chaos. LPR7 Legacy / He stepped back like it had burned him. That's you. Your old build. Why is it still alive? It was never just a system, Evelyn said, voice low, almost reverent. It was a defense mechanism. It doesn't just store data. It remembers intent. It recognizes patterns. And it reacts. Her words landed with the weight of a confession, not a boast. The server towers around them hummed louder, almost like they were listening. Miles swallowed hard. So, what happens now? Evelyn looked at him. For the first time, she didn't deflect or dodge the question. That depends. Only I can stop this, right? He nodded slowly, unsure. She tilted her head, gaze unreadable. Only if I want you to. He froze. Somewhere above, the elevator cables groaned as someone arrived on the floor. Blake, probably. Or someone else chasing smoke trails they couldn't see. The screen flickered again. A new line appeared at the bottom of the terminal. Lockdown.status escalated. Time remaining. 146 hours, 23 minutes. We're seeing duplicate payload entries across multiple clients. Tara messaged me at 9:14 a.m. And Blake said, it's just a UI glitch. The second-floor operations hub buzzed with the kind of panic that smelled like burnt coffee and wet polyester. Phones rang off hook. LED screens pulsed amber and red, each alert a different flavor of disaster. Outside, Chicago baked in a heat wave so aggressive the windows radiated warmth. Inside, it felt like they were all boiling. Slowly. Evelyn sat with her laptop on a corner console no one dared approach. She was calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that suggested she wasn't surprised. Tara, seated 2 desks away, glanced over every so often, waiting for a nod, a signal, anything. But Evelyn gave nothing. The forwarded email from Creston Federal Freight was clear. Duplicated shipments, mismatched timestamps, errant data trails suggesting entire freights moved twice when they hadn't even moved once. Blake, standing at the center of the chaos like a ringmaster in a collapsing circus, waved it off. UI caching bug? Not new. Let's pitch a hybrid cloud migration. Frame it as innovation. He announced with a rehearsed grin. Someone from legal blinked. But these errors went out to government clients. Exactly why we need to modernize, Blake quipped, as if he'd planned it all. Evelyn didn't look up. Her fingers danced across the keyboard with a grace that suggested ritual. When the terminal responded, she didn't flinch. Phase 3. Initiated on screen, the system showed no errors. It displayed confidence. It presented clean dashboards and neatly formatted reports, each one wrong in a way only someone like Evelyn could see. She closed her eyes briefly. False outputs. Not random. Crafted. Phase 3 was executing as intended. Damage containment through deception. Feed the humans what they want to see. Buy time. Create just enough coherence to avoid shutdown. She had built the seeds of this after the 2019 credential leaks. Not sabotage. Insurance. Richard's voice cut into her thoughts. "Evelyn," he said, half out of breath, his shirt damp under the armpits. "Clients are panicking. Can you take a quick look? Just give us a temperature check." She turned slowly, almost deliberately. The hum of the room seemed to fade. "Possibly a structural conflict between legacy logic and unauthorized changes," she replied, voice steady, devoid of emotion. "Resolution would require full rollback, a 12-month audit, and $12 million. Richard's jaw slackened. Tara looked up sharply from her terminal. "That's not feasible," Richard said. Evelyn tilted her head. "It's not negotiable either." Blake moved closer, finally registering the tension. "We can't just pause the whole system." "You didn't pause anything," she said without looking at him. "You started a countdown." A silence passed over the team. Even the screens seemed to dim, awaiting what would come next. Blake laughed nervously. "Wait, what countdown?" Evelyn stood, closed her laptop, and turned to walk away. No anger, no threat, just resignation polished into armor. Behind her, Tara gasped. A new line had just appeared at the base of the main operations screen. Phase 3. Lockdown confirmed. Time remaining, 32 hours, 12 minutes. "You think I'm some intern you can scare?" Blake growled. "I've got a degree. You're obsolete." The server room on the 10th floor pulsed red under emergency lighting. Racks of machines hummed like an unsettled animal, the sound deeper now. Less mechanical, more organic. It wasn't just cooling fans or processing cycles. It was the kind of resonance you felt in your chest before a storm hit. Blake stood alone in front of the main console, sweat blotching through his designer dress shirt. The override terminal displayed a third rejection. Access denied. Override protocol. Invalid network. Isolation escalating. He slammed the keyboard. "This is ridiculous. Why won't it respond?" Behind the glass partition, Evelyn watched. She hadn't spoken yet. She didn't need to. The system was speaking for her now. Miles entered from the side corridor, eyes darting between the red-tinged racks and the flickering control panel. His phone buzzed with a dozen unanswered messages from legal, risk, and external clients. "Tell me I'm wrong," he said, almost pleading. "Tell me this thing isn't making decisions on its own." Evelyn turned slightly. "It's not on its own. It remembers everything. It responds to risk. And right now, the greatest risk is him." Miles didn't argue. Blake turned and spotted her. "You," he hissed, marching toward her like a man on the verge of detonating. "What the hell did you do?" "I let it protect itself." "You built this monster." Evelyn stepped past the threshold into the red light, unshaken. "Number I built a safeguard. You ignored the warnings. You pushed undocumented changes into core logic. You triggered containment. And now you're surprised it's containing you." He moved closer, voice rising. "You think you're untouchable? You think you can blackmail this company with, what, a glorified script?" "It's not a script," she said evenly. "It's a decision tree with self-correcting logic. It reroutes trust. It locks doors that no longer recognize valid keys." He stared at her, confused. Evelyn tilted her head. "It's no longer accepting manual input. Only biometric keys. Mine." Miles flinched. "Is that legal?" "It's embedded in legacy protocol since 2016. You all signed off on it. You just never bothered to read it." Blake's face twisted. You set this up. You planted traps. No, she said calmly. You sabotaged trust. The system's just finishing the job. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The weight in her tone came not from volume, but inevitability. Blake's bravado cracked. You're finished, Evelyn. This is going to fall back on you. She stepped forward just enough to stand in front of the terminal where his access had failed. I am not your employee, she said, voice like ice. I'm the legacy code you deleted. A chime echoed through the server room. On the primary display, a new message began to scroll in large white text over a black background. System status: Phase 4 engaged. Emergency lockdown. 4 hours, 7 minutes remaining. Evelyn, please. Richard's voice trembled over the phone. We're losing everything. She didn't answer right away. The porcelain teacup in her hand was still warm. Across the street, Braverton HQ looked like a stalled spaceship. Tall, silent, gleaming with blind windows that reflected nothing. The sky above Chicago had cleared, ironically. No rain, just sharp sunlight bouncing off glass. A harsh kind of clarity. Inside the operations floor she no longer had access to, nor wanted, phones were undoubtedly ringing off the hook. Regulators had arrived before noon, not in black suits, but in government-badged polos and tablet holsters. Tara had sent her a silent update. They're going line by line. Blake's freaking out. Creston Freight had been the first to walk. Their legal counsel issued a formal statement. Effective immediately, they would cease all engagement with Braverton Analytics, citing data falsification and operational unreliability. The timing wasn't accidental. Evelyn stirred her tea once without drinking. A notification appeared on her phone, clean and simple. Caleb Morton, Valen Ridge Capital. We'd like to talk. No resume needed. She tapped the screen, let it go dark again. Then came the final call. Richard. I don't know what you've done, he said, his voice lined with desperation. But it's falling apart. The entire archival system just went blank. Legal is asking questions I can't answer. Blake's locked out. Finance can't access payroll. You need to fix this. Evelyn didn't raise her voice. You built this on sand. He was silent. The call ended itself. At precisely 5:03 p.m., she saw the first physical sign of Phase 5. Lights in the west wing of the Braverton building flickered and died. One floor at a time, systems were going dark. Not crashing, not erroring, just ceasing. Like a surgical removal of every infected node. Zero retention purge had begun. Not a single line of Evelyn's code required intervention. It was self-aware, self-healing, and self-erasing. Every backup in cold storage, every mirrored node offshore, even encrypted caches were overwritten with nothing. She watched. The final sequence displayed only within the root system, something no human would ever see again. Finalize purge retention, policy equals 0 execute. At 5:17 p.m., Evelyn closed her laptop, says out loud, They thought they replaced me. But what they deleted was their only protection. They thought Evelyn was finished the moment they sidelined her. For years, she was the backbone of Braverton Analytics, silently ensuring every system worked, every risk was mitigated, every hole was patched before it even formed. She didn't ask for applause. She didn't seek credit. And that silence, ironically, became the very reason they chose to erase her. They replaced wisdom with noise, experience with arrogance. Blake, with his shiny credentials and shallow understanding, was handed the keys to an empire he had no idea how to run. Richard, ever the puppet master behind the glass, pulled the strings with the same smug belief that authority outweighed capability. To them, Evelyn was old code, useful once, expendable now. But the thing they didn't realize about old code is that it never really leaves. It embeds itself. It listens. And when the time is right, it responds. As systems began to fail and alarms started to ring, Evelyn remained calm. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't fight back with words. She let the system speak. And it did. Brilliantly, relentlessly, devastatingly. Each malfunction was not chaos. It was choreography. A carefully timed unraveling that mirrored every careless decision they had made, every blind spot they ignored. Richard begged. Blake screamed. The board panicked. And Evelyn? She sipped her tea across the street, watching the tower they built collapse in silence. What they thought was a glitch was in fact a mirror. The system didn't betray them. It simply held up a reflection too brutal for them to accept. And in that reflection, their true failure was laid bare. Not just technical, but moral. They underestimated loyalty. They misunderstood control. They believed they could override integrity with authority. But some things are hard-coded. Evelyn had built more than just a network. She built safeguards no one asked for, redundancies no one respected, and defense mechanisms no one believed they'd ever need. Not because she was paranoid, but because she understood. When power is placed in the wrong hands, systems don't just need to function. They need to protect themselves. When the purge began, it wasn't an attack. It was a cleansing. Not violent, not dramatic, just final. Years of backups? Gone. Offsite cold storage? Wiped. Failovers and audit trails? Erased like they never existed. The system didn't crash. It concluded. It closed its own book, locked the cover, and left no key behind. Evelyn walked away without touching a single terminal. She didn't need revenge. She had architecture. She didn't need applause. She had silence. And in that silence, she reclaimed her dignity, not by fighting their corruption, but by proving it unsustainable. Justice doesn't always come dressed in courtrooms and verdicts. Sometimes it arrives wearing the face of inevitability. Sometimes it's the soft blink of a green light inside a dark server rack, humming peacefully after everything else has shut down. Sometimes it's knowing that the very people who called you obsolete are now scrambling to undo what they were never qualified to understand. Evelyn didn't burn bridges. She let them collapse under the weight of arrogance. In the end, her only statement wasn't to the people who betrayed her, but to the system that had once carried her fingerprints on every line of code. She whispered not to them, but to it. You were never broken. They just never knew how to listen. Some might say she disappeared. But that's not quite true. People like Evelyn don't vanish. They become legacy. Not in plaques or portraits, but in every safeguard that survives the storm. In every protocol that still runs. In every engineer who learns from her story and builds not for applause, but for endurance. Like a melody composed in silence, her legacy won't be heard in noise, but in resilience. And so, the lesson she left behind was simple. Never confuse quiet competence with weakness. Never assume silence means surrender. And never delete the one line of code that holds your entire foundation together. Because when injustice is met with unwavering courage, the final verdict can echo through a lifetime. Her journey reminds us all. Sometimes the most powerful way to fight back is not to fight at all, but to prepare, to endure, and to let the truth do what it always does best. Rise. No wall of lies can stand forever against the tide of truth. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and leave a comment below with a 1 if you've ever been underestimated and found your own way to rise. Let your voice be heard. Let your story be known.